Welcome! You're listening to the Uncharted Lancaster podcast, where we explore the hidden histories, forgotten places, and long-buried secrets of Lancaster County. Using modern digital storytelling tools, each episode brings a new piece of local lore to life, revealing the strange, the surprising, and the stories history left behind. Let's begin.
You know, whenever we sit down to talk about the American Revolution, I feel like we immediately revert to the greatest hits album. It's sort of the blockbuster movie version of history that lives in our heads.
Mm-hmm.
You've got the heavy hitters, George Washington looking stoic on a white horse, Thomas Jefferson scratching away with a quill by candlelight.
Ben Franklin with the kite and the key looking very witty in those little spectacles.
Exactly. They are the stars, the A-listers.
They are the headliners, for sure. The faces on the currency. The ones who get the Broadway musicals written about them.
Right. And they take up so much oxygen in the room that we forget there were other people there, a lot of other people.
A whole cast of supporting characters who are just as critical to the story.
Well, today I want to introduce you to a mystery guest, a man who is technically in that ultra-exclusive club. He signed the Declaration of Independence. But if you mention his name to the average person on the street today,
They'll probably give you a blank look.
A blank look, or even worse, they'll confuse him with a family member who wasn't even a politician.
Which is a bit of a historical injustice, really, when you consider the risks he took. But it happens.
It does.
History has a way of compressing a cast of thousands into just a few main characters. It's easier to remember that way.
Well, today we are expanding the cast. We are talking about George Ross of Lancaster, Pennsylvania.
A fascinating figure.
And here is the aha moment teaser before we even really start. This man wasn't even in Congress when the big vote for independence happened on July 4th.
He wasn't in the room.
Not in the room where it happened, to borrow a phrase. Yet his signature is right there on the parchment.
It's a great anomaly. It really is. It defies the standard timeline we're all taught in grade school.
Totally.
We have this image of everyone gathering on one hot day in July. They vote, they sign, and then they go out for a celebratory dinner.
Right. Done and dusted.
But the reality was so much messier, and George Ross is, I think, the perfect example of that messiness.
So our mission today is to do a deep dive into this man's life. And honestly, the more I looked into this stack of notes, the more I realized this isn't just a biography.
No, it's more than that.
It's a case study in transformation.
Transformation is exactly the word. It's the word I kept coming back to while reviewing all the research for this.
Right.
This isn't a story about a guy who was born shouting liberty or death. This is a case study of a man who spent 12 years working as the King's Crown prosecutor.
Let's just pause on that.
Yeah.
The King's Crown prosecutor.
He was the establishment. He was the system.
Yeah.
And we have to figure out how a man goes from being the legal face of the British Crown in Pennsylvania to a revolutionary risking execution for treason.
That is the mission today. That's the core question. We are looking at the evolution of political thought, the incredible cost of public service, and the personal sacrifices that are just hidden behind that one signature.
And we should mention what we're working with here. We have a really fascinating stack of source material.
A good stack this week.
Yeah, it is. We've got biographies from the Lancaster County Historical Society, which are great for local context. We have excerpts from a publication called Uncharted Lancaster.
I like that name.
Me too. We've also got records from the Constitution Center and some very, very granular genealogical data from the descendants of the signers of the Declaration of Independence.
It's a heavy stack. So let's set the scene before we get into the man himself. We need to kind of wipe away the modern world for a minute.
Okay.
We are in the mid-1700s in Pennsylvania. It's bustling, it's growing, but it's also on the edge.
It's a powder keg waiting for a spark. It really is. You have this palpable shift happening from a loyal, mostly obedient colony to a hotbed of rebellion.
And Lancaster's right in the thick of it. This is not some sleepy backwater.
Not at all. It's a major hub, a crossroads. And walking the streets of this hub is our guy, George Ross.
So let's go back to the beginning, Section 1, Origins and the Loyal Beginning. Where does a man like George Ross even come from?
Well, he starts his journey in Newcastle, Delaware. He was born there on May 10th, 1730. But to understand George, you really have to start with his father.
Okay.
His father was the Reverend George Aeneas Ross.
A reverend. So a religious household from the get-go.
Very much so. An Anglican clergyman, which is important. That's the Church of England.
Uh-huh.
And he was educated at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. A very, very learned man.
And apparently a very busy man in his personal life as well.
That's one way to put it, yes.
I saw this number in the notes, and I had to double-check it because I thought it was a typo.
Huh.
The family context here is massive.
It is truly staggering. Reverend Ross had 2 wives over his lifetime and a total of 16 children.
16.
16.
Can you imagine the dinner table conversation? Or just the logistics of shoes?
It's a small army. But it also tells you something important about George's upbringing. In a family that large, you have to learn to negotiate.
You have to fight for your voice.
You have to learn to stand out, to make an argument. And despite the sheer size of the brood, the records are clear that they all received a sound classical education right there at home.
Which is incredible. The father must have been running a full-time school on top of his clerical duties.
It's deeply impressive. And there's a bit of aristocratic blood in there too, right? I saw a note about his ancestry.
You did. It's a fascinating little detail. The paternal line traces all the way back to the 13th century.
Wow.
Specifically to the first Earl of Ross in Scotland, around the year 1226.
So there is this lineage of, leadership, nobility, however distant it might be.
Exactly. It's in the background. But George isn't resting on some ancient Scottish title. He's a practical American colonist. And at age 18, he leaves the nest.
He heads to the big city.
Philadelphia.
Which was, the intellectual and cultural capital of the colonies at the time. He goes there to study law.
And this is a crucial connection point.
Yeah.
He doesn't just go to any law school, because they didn't really exist like that. He studies under his older brother, John Ross.
John Ross. Okay, listener, put a pin in that name. John Ross. It sounds generic right now, but that name is the bridge to one of the most famous legends in American history. We will absolutely get to that later.
We will. So he apprentices with his brother John, he soaks up the law, and he gets admitted to the bar in 1750. He's only 20 years old.
20? It seems so young.
It's impossibly young to imagine a lawyer today, but, people just had to grow up faster back then.
They did, and by 1751, the very next year, he moves to Lancaster, Pennsylvania to hang out his shingle and start his own practice.
And this is where we run into the first major contradiction of his life.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you assume every signer of the Declaration was a lifelong, born and bred rebel...
George Ross proves you wrong immediately.
Right. The sources are absolutely crystal clear on his initial political stance. George Ross was a Tory.
A Tory. Loyal to the crown. Mm-hmm. And we aren't just talking about his personal feelings over a pint at the tavern.
No, this was his career.
It was his entire professional identity. For 12 years, George Ross served as the Crown Prosecutor, essentially the Attorney General for Carlisle.
Let's just unpack that title for a second. Crown. Prosecutor. His job was to prosecute people in the name of King George III.
Precisely. If you broke a law that the British Parliament passed, whether it was a tax law or something else, George Ross was the guy standing up in court arguing that you should be punished for it.
He wasn't fighting the system. He was the system. He represented the establishment in every sense of the word.
The full weight of British legal authority.
That is just wild to think about. We're talking about more than a decade of his life, his prime earning years, spent legally representing the very entity he would eventually commit high treason against.
And that's what makes his story so compelling. He wasn't a born rebel. He was a man of the law. And the law, for him, was British law.
So the question becomes, what changed? How do you go from prosecuting the king's enemies to becoming one yourself?
It's the central mystery of his life. And that brings us to section 2, the transformation. We are looking at the years between 1768 and 1774. This seems to be the crucible.
It is. The first big step happens in 1768. Ross gets elected to the provincial legislature of Pennsylvania.
And this puts him in a totally different arena. As a prosecutor, he's just applying the law as written.
Right, it's reactive.
Exactly. But as a legislator, he's debating policy. He's at the table where the decisions are being made. And this is where he starts to see the friction up close.
He's seeing the sausage getting made, and he does not like the recipe.
That's a perfect way to put it. He witnesses this rising, constant conflict between the colonial assemblies, who, represent the people actually living and working there, and the Parliament back in London, who are just handing down decrees from 3,000 miles away.
He's caught in the middle.
For a while, yes. The sources say he started out sympathetic to the crown's position, which makes sense given his background. But over time, he became, and this is a direct quote, disgusted with Tory politics.
Disgusted. That's such a strong word. It's visceral. It implies a moral shift, not just a political calculation.
I think it was. You have to imagine a man who reveres the law, seeing that law being used as a cudgel against his own neighbors, his own constituents.
The Stamp Acts, the Townsend Acts.
Yeah.
All of that would have been happening right when he's in the legislature.
All of it. And it wasn't an instantaneous flip. It was a slow burn. But the spark that really seems to have set the whole thing off for him was in 1774.
June 15th, 1774. There's a crucial meeting at the Lancaster courthouse.
This is the moment he publicly steps out of the establishment shadow. The meeting was called to discuss the mistreatment of the people in Boston.
This is after the Tea Party, so the British have shut down Boston Harbor.
Exactly. The coercive acts, or the intolerable acts, as the colonists called them. The colonies were starting to feel that Boston's pain was everyone's pain.
And George Ross didn't just attend this meeting.
No, he chaired it. He was at the front of the room. The former Crown prosecutor is now leading the protest meeting.
It's an incredible reversal.
And he didn't just sit there. He made a speech. A public speech asking the citizens of Lancaster to support the idea of a Continental Congress to coordinate a response.
He is now publicly organizing against the government he used to represent, legally.
That feels like a point of no return. Once you stand up in the courthouse, your old stomping grounds, and say, we need to organize against the king, you can't really go back to being a loyal Tory.
No, you've crossed the Rubicon.
You have, and the people of Lancaster responded. They elected him to the First Continental Congress later that year in 1774.
And then re-elected him to the Second Continental Congress in 1775.
And he wasn't just a backbencher either. He wasn't just sitting in a chair debating philosophy. The notes are specific. He was on the Committee of Safety for Pennsylvania,
Which was essentially the revolutionary government of the state.
It was. And he also served as the Inspector of Military Supplies.
Inspector of Military Supplies. That sounds like a logistical nightmare, but also a critically important job if you're planning a revolution.
It's the absolute nuts and bolts of war. It's counting barrels of gunpowder, inspecting blankets, sourcing lead for musket balls. It means he's not just talking about revolution. He is actively arming it.
He is fully committed now. There is no ambiguity left.
None whatsoever.
Okay, so he's in Congress. He's a leader in the Pennsylvania delegation. This brings us to the big moment, or rather, the moment he missed. Section 3, the Declaration discrepancy.
Right. This is the aha moment for so many people when they learn about him.
We celebrate July 4th, 1776. We all have that image in our heads from the paintings. The room is full. Everyone is sweating in their wigs. They vote. They sign. Boom, America's born.
The triumphant moment.
But if you actually look at the roll call for the vote on July 4th, 1776, George Ross's name is absent.
He is not just absent. He wasn't even a member of Congress on that specific day.
Wait, explain that. He was elected in 74 and 75. What happened?
Politics happened. Colonial politics were complicated and messy. The Pennsylvania delegation was in absolute turmoil at that time.
Right, because Pennsylvania was seen as a more moderate, even conservative colony.
Very much so. There was a huge internal struggle between the more radical factions, who wanted immediate independence, and the more moderate factions, led by figures like John Dickinson, who were still hoping for reconciliation.
So the delegation was divided.
Deeply. And the composition of the delegation kept changing as the political winds shifted back in Lancaster and Philadelphia. In that particular session leading up to July, Ross was out. He had not been selected to represent Pennsylvania.
So on July 4th, when the bells are supposedly ringing and the Declaration is adopted, George Ross is where? Back in Lancaster.
Most likely in Pennsylvania, yes. Perhaps handling his legal practice, or more likely his duties with the Committee of Safety and Military Supplies. But he was definitely not in Independence Hall voting yay or nay.
He gets elected to Congress again, but not until when?
Not until July 20, 1776.
16 days after the vote.
16 days after the world-changing decision was made.
So he arrives in Philadelphia late for the party.
He arrives late, but he arrives in time for the main event, in a way.
What do you mean?
Most of the delegates didn't actually sign the physical parchment on July 4th. That's a common misconception. The document had to be engrossed, that is, formally written out on parchment.
So the big signing ceremony we see in the famous Trumbull painting.
That took place on August 2, 1776. And by then, George Ross had taken a seat in Congress. He was there, quill in hand.
This raises a really important question, though. If you weren't there for the vote, why sign it?
Exactly.
You missed the debate. You missed the decision. You could have easily and probably safely said, well, I wasn't here. Not my handwriting. Don't hang me.
That's the critical point of his story, I think. He didn't have to sign. By putting his name on that document, he was retroactively putting his neck on the line for a decision he didn't technically cast a vote for.
He was endorsing a retroactive death warrant.
It is. The act of signing was a powerful show of unity, especially for the Pennsylvania legal community. Ross was a heavyweight lawyer. He was respected.
His signature meant something.
It signaled to everyone, Tories and Patriots alike, that the legal mind of Lancaster was behind this treason. And the sources say he did not hesitate.
And while all this political drama is unfolding, he isn't just a guy in a suit. The notes mention he is also a colonel.
Yes, colonel in the Continental Army, 1776, 1st Battalion of the Lancaster County Militia.
So he's got a military command.
He does. And on top of that, he undertook negotiations with the Northwestern Indian tribes on behalf of Pennsylvania. So he's juggling legislative duties in the capital, military rank back home, and high-stakes diplomacy on the frontier, all at the same time.
The man clearly didn't sleep.
Probably not much. The stakes were just too high.
Now, speaking of things that keep you awake at night, let's talk about family drama. Or maybe not drama, but family fame. We have to address Section 4, the famous family connection.
The elephant in the room.
It is. Because if you say the name Ross in the context of the American Revolution, 99% of people are going to say,
Betsy
Ross.
And rightfully so. She's an American icon. But the connection to George is much closer than most people realize.
Let's lay it out clearly. George Ross was the uncle of a man named John Ross.
Correct. And to be clear, this is not his brother John, the one he studied law under. This is his nephew, also named John.
Right. Too many Johns. So George is the uncle of the younger John Ross.
Yes. And that younger John Ross married a woman named Betsy Griscom,
who became, of course, Betsy Ross,
making George Ross her uncle-in-law.
So there's a direct family tie. And there is just a delicious irony here. George Ross is this high-powered statesman, a signer of the Declaration, a colonel, a judge.
And yet he is often just a footnote in the story of his nephew's wife, who was a seamstress and upholsterer.
History is funny that way.
Yeah.
But let's get into the legend, because George actually plays a role in the famous Betsy Ross flag story, doesn't he?
He does. He's one of the 3 men in the room. Now, we have to put a big asterisk here. This story is family legend. It was passed down orally through the Ross family for generations before it was made public by her grandson in the 1870s. There's no, contemporary written account from 1776.
So not hard documented fact, but a very persistent and powerful legend.
Exactly. The story goes that in May or June of 1776, a secret committee of 3 men visited Betsy Ross's upholstery shop in Philadelphia.
And this committee was
Robert Morris, the great financier of the Revolution, George Washington, the commander-in-chief, and George Ross.
So the uncle-in-law brings the general to his niece's shop.
That's the dynamic. Hey, General, I know a great seamstress. My nephew's wife is fantastic with a nettle. Let's go see her.
And the story goes that Washington had a sketch of a flag. He wanted the 13 stars and stripes. But in his sketch, the stars had 6 points.
6 points, like the Star of David shape.
Right. And Betsy, being the practical artisan, the person who actually has to do the work, looks at it and says what?
Allegedly, she said something to the effect of, 6 points is too hard to make neatly and quickly in bulk. I can make a 5-pointed star with one single snip of the scissors.
And then she demonstrates.
She folds a piece of cloth, snip, opens it up, and there it is, a perfect 5-pointed star.
And Washington, being a practical general who needs a lot of flags made quickly, says, sold.
That's the legend. And thus, the American flag has 5-pointed stars instead of 6.
It's a great story. Whether it's 100% verifiably true or not, it places George Ross right in the center of the creation of the nation's most powerful symbol.
It does. And the house where this supposedly happened still stands in Philadelphia. You can visit it. But again, it's just so ironic that George Ross, the man who risked execution by signing the Declaration, is often just the 3rd guy in the story of the flag being made.
The ultimate supporting actor role.
In his own family's most famous story, yes.
Let's bring it back from Philadelphia to George's home turf. Section 5, Rossmere and the local legacy.
Right, because if you go to Lancaster today, you see the name Ross everywhere. There's a Ross Street, a Ross Elementary School. This all comes from his estate.
He owned a farm, correct? Between what was then Lancaster City and Manheim Township.
He did, and it was called Rossmere.
Okay, now I have to geek out on the etymology here for a second because the notes went into this and I found it fascinating.
Yeah.
Rossmere. Mere usually means like a swamp or a shallow lake. I pictured him living in a bog.
And you wouldn't be alone. Some local historians thought the same thing. They were looking around for some lost wetland that just didn't exist.
But that's not what it meant.
No. If you go back to Old English, mere can also mean a boundary or a border.
Like a demarcation line.
Exactly. So Ross Mere almost certainly meant Ross's boundary. His estate marked the dividing line between the city and the township. It wasn't a swamp, it was a border.
That makes so much more sense for a wealthy lawyer's country estate. Does the house itself still stand?
Sadly, no. The mansion was torn down in 1894.
Oh, that's a shame.
It's a classic case of, late 19th century urban development erasing history. Progress marches on.
But there's something there now, right? A monument.
There is. At 320 East Ross Street, there's a monument marking the spot.
And what does it say?
It's a very simple, very dignified inscription. Here stood the house of George Ross, signer of the Declaration of Independence, lawyer, statesman, patriot.
Lawyer, statesman, patriot. A good, concise summary. But his story didn't end with signing the Declaration. Section 6 takes us into his later career, which sounds surprisingly conflict-heavy.
It was. George Ross didn't just sign the paper and retire to the porch to watch the war, but his health really started to fail him.
Right. The notes mention he resigned from the Continental Congress in 1777.
He did, due to failing health.
Yeah.
The specific culprit was severe gout.
Gout. The disease of kings, they used to call it. But from everything I've read, it's just incredibly painful.
Excruciating. It's a form of inflammatory arthritis. Terrible joint pain, swelling. It would make the travel to and from Philadelphia agonizing.
So he steps back from the national stage, but he doesn't stop working.
No, he takes a role closer to home. In 1779, just before his death, he is appointed judge of the Pennsylvania Court of Admiralty.
Court of Admiralty. That sounds like maritime law. Pirates and prizes.
Exactly that. During the war, American privateers were capturing British ships left and right. This court had to decide the legality of those captures and how to distribute the prize money from the ship and its cargo.
So it's a busy court.
A very busy and very contentious court. And this is where George Ross gets involved in a legal battle that is surprisingly relevant to all of American history.
The notes mentioned a specific incident from 1778-1779, a dispute between a citizen of Connecticut and the state of Pennsylvania.
This is the Gideon Olmsted case, though the notes just refer to it generally. It's a bit complicated, but basically a group of Connecticut sailors captured a British ship, a Pennsylvania ship, then helped them bring it to port.
Okay, so who gets the prize money?
That's the question. Judge Ross, in his Pennsylvania court, awarded most of the money to Pennsylvania. But the Connecticut sailors appealed.
Appealed to who? There's no Supreme Court yet.
Exactly. They appealed to a special committee set up by the Continental Congress, sort of proto-federal appeals court. And that congressional court overruled George Ross's decision.
Okay, so the federal government says, you're wrong, and the state judge says.
The state judge says, I don't care.
Wow.
Ross flat out refused to acknowledge the authority of the higher congressional court to counter a state court's decision. He stood his ground. He basically said, I am a judge of a sovereign state, Pennsylvania, and this congressional committee has no jurisdiction over my courtroom.
That sounds like states' rights.
It is.
Yeah.
It's one of the very earliest, clearest manifestations of the states' rights controversy that will dominate American politics for the next 200 years.
This is 1779. The war isn't even over yet. The Constitution hasn't been written. We're still under the weak Articles of Confederation.
And George Ross is already fighting the battle of state versus federal power. It's incredible.
That is fascinating. He's a revolutionary fighting the British, but simultaneously, he's fighting the new central government he helped create, all to protect Pennsylvania's sovereignty.
It just shows you how messy and uncertain everything was. The United States were not very united yet. And this particular legal dispute, by the way, didn't fully subside until a Supreme Court decision in 1809, long after Ross was dead.
So even at the very end of his life, battling this horrible illness, he was right in the middle of defining what the United States legal system was going to look like.
He was on the front lines of jurisprudence.
And when you say end of his life, we really are at the end.
Which brings us to Section 7, Tragedy and Final Days. This part of the story is just heartbreaking.
It really is. We have to talk about his wife, Anne Lawler Ross. They were married in 1751. She was with him through the early days in Lancaster, the Crown Prosecutor days, his rise in the legislature.
But she died in 1773.
May 28, 1773. Let's just put that date in context. That is 3 years before the Declaration of Independence was signed.
Right. She never saw him sign it. She never saw him become a patriot icon. She knew him primarily as a Tory, a loyal subject of the king, a successful establishment lawyer. She missed his entire transformation.
That is just so heavy. She died thinking they were British subjects, and he had to go through that entire life-altering, world-changing process as a widower.
As a widower with 3 children, he had to navigate that transformation alone. Her grave, by the way, is in St. James Episcopal Churchyard, but it's no longer marked.
That's sad. Let's talk about those children, though, because they really carried the torch.
They absolutely did. His son, George Ross Jr., became a devoted patriot in his own right. He served as vice president of the Supreme Executive Council of Pennsylvania, which is a very high executive role.
So he followed his father into politics.
He did, and he was the Register of Wills for 18 years. He became a pillar of the new community his father helped build.
And the other son, James.
James Ross was the warrior of the family. He was all in from the very beginning. He raised troops in 1775. He became a lieutenant colonel.
And he saw action.
Oh, he saw serious action. The records list him fighting at the Battle of Long Island, Trenton, Germantown, Brandywine. These are the major, bloody, pivotal battles of the war.
So while his dad was fighting in courtrooms in Congress, James was fighting on the front lines.
A true frontline soldier. The family was contributing on every level.
And the daughter, Mary.
Mary Ross lived an incredibly long life. She lived to be 92, dying in 1858. She married 3 times. She was the bridge from the colonial era almost to the Civil War.
But George himself, he didn't get that kind of longevity.
No, not at all. George Ross died on July 14th, 1779.
He was only 49 years old.
49. Today, that's mid-career. Back then, it was still considered somewhat young for a man of his stature and accomplishments.
And the cause was the severe gout.
The severe gout likely led to complications that ultimately took his life.
And the date, July 1779. The war is still raging. Yorktown is still 2 years away.
That's the ultimate sad irony of his life. Neither George nor his wife Anne lived to see the American victory.
He died knowing he had committed treason, knowing the war was still very much undecided, and never knowing for sure if this whole American experiment would actually work.
He signed the paper, he risked the hanging, he worked himself to an early grave, and he died before the payoff.
That is the absolute definition of faith in a cause. To do all that without any guarantee of success.
Total faith.
So let's try to synthesize this as we wrap up. What does the story of George Ross tell us? What's the takeaway?
I think it tells us that revolutions aren't just made by young hotheads and radical firebrands. They are also made by established, thoughtful, respected people who are willing to change their minds based on evidence.
That's a great point.
George Ross was a lawyer who respected the law so much that he eventually came to believe he had to break it in order to form a new, more just one.
I love that. And I love the idea that change is a process. He wasn't born a revolutionary. He was made one by observing the world around him. He looked at the facts, he changed his opinion, and then, this is the important part, he acted on it.
And he didn't let being late stop him. He missed the vote, but he made damn sure he didn't miss the history. He showed up and put his name on the line.
Here is where it gets really interesting for us today. I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to chew on.
Yeah.
George Ross died at 49 in the fog of war. He had no guarantee of success. In 1779, it was still entirely possible the British would win, and his children would be the orphans of a traitor.
Absolutely. A very real possibility.
So if you had to sign a document today, right now, a document that guaranteed your execution if your side lost, and you knew you probably wouldn't even live long enough to see if you won, would you pick up the quill?
That is the ultimate question of the founders, isn't it? It's easy to be brave in retrospect. It's easy to sign when you know you win in the end. It's a completely different thing to sign when you might just be signing your own death warrant for a future you'll never see.
George Ross picked up the quill. And because of that, we're here talking about him today. If you're ever in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, go find that monument on Ross Street. Give a nod to the mystery guest of the Declaration. Thanks for diving in with us.
So curious.
We'll see you on the next deep dive.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Uncharted Lancaster podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to subscribe and leave a rating or review wherever you listen. It really helps more people discover the show. For more fascinating local history, visit unchartedlancaster.com. And if you'd like to go deeper, check out one of Adam Zern's books at unchartedlancaster.com/books. Until next time, keep exploring.